it takes me forever to get to introductions, so uh it's usually sometimes like an hour in. But anyways, it's been a while since we talked. I think the first time we talked was on oh god, I think it was on Follow the Rules. Back when I was anyways, never mind. I think you were on like an episode or two, if I
I think,
recall.
yeah, Lev
Yeah.
had me on a couple of times, but that was a couple of years ago at least.
Yeah.
Been a
It was
while.
like Clownvid era. But yeah, so it's been a while then. But you're recently putting out content, and I always wanted to like get at the heart of how should I say, it's hard to even like put a finger on the problem, but I guess
A big John K finger.
yeah, exactly, yeah, or like that painting by Caravaggio of Abraham. But anyways, to put like a huge thumb on the problem of, I guess you could say, the intersection between animation, kitsch, and identity. But before we get into that, so how'd you? Okay, so for those who don't know, for the audience who doesn't know, I know it's like stupid pretending that there's an audience there, but anyways, just for like the sake of my audience, who are you, Spumdonor? How did you come about, and what's your journey been like on the intranuts, if you will?
I started kind of posting on Twitter during when COVID started, when I had a lot of extra time on my hands at home. And the reason that I started shit posting about cartoons and animation in particular is because the average Twitter user was very ignorant and had very bad taste about animation, and I just wanted to make fun of them. But the motivation for that kind of came from being a part of the animation blog culture of the 2000s, which it's kind of crazy to think about now, but John Kricfalusi basically was the king of the hill in 2000s animation blog culture, because his animation blog, which is still up, you can still read it amazingly, johnkstuff.blogspot.com. He was an incredibly prolific blogger, and of course he talked about Ren and Stimpy, and he relitigated some of the behind the scenes stuff about that and how it wasn't his fault that he got fired. It actually kind of was, but that's neither here nor there.
He was a cantankerous individual to work with, to say the least. So
yeah, but the bottom line, he really couldn't make his deadlines, and it wasn't just Nickelodeon's fault. But anyways, the point is, he talked a lot about animation history on his blog, and I know I've come to know some animation historian types who don't entirely agree with his interpretations of animation history, but he really got people excited about animation history and also animation and cartoons in a really energizing way. And I wish the comments sections on his blog posts are all taken down.
I could imagine why.
Obvious reasons, but they were incredible, because people would just have these like heated debates about whether or not Animaniacs was good and other things that are probably more important than that. But I mean, like, really funny stuff sometimes too. You can actually still look it up by looking up the URL on Internet Archive. But he would say something like, I don't know, like, yeah, the Care Bears was so faggy, and then people would say, like, John, as I really respect you and your work, but I take issue with your use of the term faggy. Okay, I mean, he was a little bit more verbose than that, but
yeah, don't worry about censoring yourself, because I edit all these for YouTube, so don't worry about
that. Okay. But I mean, what John K's blogging meant to me at the time was he kind of, and I guess he started really around 2004 at the earliest, but there was like a good 5-year period from like 04 or 09 or so where you could like go to that blog every single day, and he was almost uploading something every day about all these different aspects of not just TV cartoons, but theatrical and Disney and all the different studios and old illustrative artists and all these like nooks and crannies of cartoon history that nobody else was talking about. But besides just encouraging a passionate interest in people about all these different aspects of cartoon history, he also kind of provided a framework for understanding the history of cartooning in America and
Mhm.
why animation had become so degraded. And it's not just one thing, of course, but essentially he was very vocal about how the animation industry after the golden age, after the Disney and Warner Brothers golden years from the 1930s up through the 1950s or
So
60s at the latest,
so the
why that
golden years would be considered like pre and post war, or up until.
yeah, but it wasn't even so much the war, it was really television. Like the advent of television
Mm.
uh kind of ruined American animation in a way that it's never really recovered from. And even though there were some real gems in those early years, from Hanna-Barbera and UPA and shows like Roger Ramjet or George of the Jungle or the Alvin Show, uh, Jay Ward, those types of things, that kind of fizzled out really quickly. The only reason that it was good for a time basically was because a lot of the golden age guys were working on those shows.
Mm.
Like the Flintstones had guys who were Warner Brothers animators pitching in on it, for example. But that by the end of the 60s, it kind of became the Saturday morning Scooby-Doo knockoff slop that we associate with when we say Saturday morning cartoons in a derogatory way. And John actually was working, he entered the industry in the late 70s, so he was there for all of that. He was there for the real dregs of the animation industry,
Oh yeah.
and he was there when it got better. He was working with Ralph Bakshi on his reboot of Mighty Mouse that changed the industry. And then of course there was Ren and Stimpy, and he kept in touch with all of those guys who started with him and then went on to great things in the 90s. Bruce Timm, he was like a coworker of Bruce Timm on Mighty Mouse, for example. But anyways, he really had this inside perspective. And again, it's like you may not agree with his interpretations of events, but he was he really provided a context for everything. And I'm sure, Gio, you're about my age. Like, it was a really interesting time growing up in the
Well,
90s because,
I was
I'm
going to
sorry.
ask you, are
Yeah.
you not to age docs, but are you considered Gen X or you core millennial? Because I'm 31 years old, so I'm like core
Oh,
millennial.
okay. No, I'm sorry. It's your crusty exterior. You had me fooled. I'm sorry. I'm pushing 40, so never mind.
Oh, so you are like core Gen X then, yeah, or like
No. I'm core. I'm old millennial.
old
I
head
mean,
millennial, yeah.
yeah. At best, I'm like, no. I could never, in good conscience, call myself a Gen Xer. I'm just an old head millennial. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so let me rephrase that. Growing up in the 90s was a really interesting time to be a kid for a lot of reasons, but when it came to watching cartoons, all the old crap was still on the air in reruns, but at the same time you were seeing all this new and better stuff. So I think if you were a kid like I was with some kind of interest in the arts and arts history, you were looking at this and thinking, well, how come the stuff from not very long ago is so bad, and why did it get so much better? And then I think by the end of the 2000s, I mean, I stopped watching TV on a regular basis in the mid 2000s
Yeah.
probably, but I think by the end of the 2000s, like there was a real sea change again. And I could never say that the animation industry today is putting out stuff as bad as it was in the 70s and 80s, especially the 70s, which is the real dark ages of American animation. But yeah, something has changed again, and it really seems to be stagnating again now. And part of that is also just due to the fact that like TV is not the vibrant, popular medium that it used to be. But something's changed in the animation industry again too. It's in doldrums again.
Yeah, like when I was a kid, like if you were a kid of the sort of core millennial generation from the late 90s to the early 2000s, it was like this explosion of creativity and all those legacy brands that we know today, from like you name it, SpongeBob, Dexter, even like I remember when I was a kid, because my cousin, who was Gen X or core Gen X, her favorite show was Ren and Stimpy.
Hmm.
And my parents would freak because like, why are you letting him watch that crap? And it's like, and then ripping Friends. And then like when I was a kid, I used to watch like, because being a leaf, I would watch those like quote unquote adult cartoons that would come on like Teletoon late night. So like
Oh boy.
yeah, so
Yeah.
like undergrads, John Callahan's Quads, um Clone High, like that. Apparently they came back with Clone High, but they came back with like a woke version of it. And
Those
so
are
it
those
was
are some
terrible.
yeah, those are some of the better ones too.
Yeah.
I mean, Canadian animation, I've kind of made fun of it before because it had a tendency to kind of always be playing catch up to American animation
Oh
and
yeah.
coming off as some like weird off-brand version of it.
Yeah, that's true. But there was but so what you're leading up to is like, why is and I want to get back to the John K stuff. Because if I recall, wasn't your handle John K Respecter back in the day?
Well, yeah, because at first I had no intention but to just provoke people, and that was
Yeah,
always
you used to go to war with people on
that
like
was
their
a
Twitter.
that's a real conversation starter. John K. Respecter, and then I
And
it
for
really
those who
gets
don't
people
know,
talking.
yeah, like, but I mean, for our, I know, like, I hate to even bring this up, but it's my podcast journalistic duty. Um, you of course do not condone all this stuff that we don't have to mention with John K, right? Like that disavow, disavow,
Correct.
disavow. Yeah,
Correct.
okay, okay,
Yeah. I
yeah,
mean,
but
but I changed that name because it just got tedious to explain that I respected him for his accomplishments and for his outspokenness about the industry and not all the other stuff, because it was a little dishonest of me being like, no, no, you don't understand. And it's like, okay, but I want them to misunderstand a little bit so that I can grab their attention. It was a provocation, yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's sort of like anime racist. They'll have handles of like prolific figures. One particular person of a certain battalion in the mid-century German. But anyways, but it's very but I remember you used to like go to war on the TL with animation, or what people would call art Twitter, which I wanted to get into. But it is unfortunate because John K truly is a genius when it comes to animation. And I think that um I saw this thread the other day from you where you were talking about like the difference between like the wordiness, but I'll save that. I always get distracted. I always go off a million tangents, but I'll save it for later. But let's get to like, why was there this huge sea change in around like the mid to late 90s? I know a certain like YouTube video essays, they're like, well, the Simpsons changed everything and so forth. I mean, I guess that is true compared to like what animated entertainment was in the 70s and 80s. But then the 80s, you also still you had like you had things that were like like heavy metal, or like you mentioned Ralph Bakshi with like Fritz the Cat, like things that were more raunchy and raw and
Hmm.
for an adult audience. But it seems that, unlike for example in Japan, here in North America, even Europe as well, Europe, they have a lot of to them, like comic books and animation is quite different. But
Hmm.
here in North America, for some reason, we always equate animation with like kid stuff. And that, yeah, yeah.
Well, that you have one man to thank for that. Is it rhymes with Disney.
Walt Disney. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I literally there's a timeline where the Fleischers won the war, and animation truly is for everyone, but we don't live in that timeline. We live in the post Disney timeline, and that's the Disney curse. I don't know if Americans will ever really embrace animation as something that is not inherently just for children and only sometimes for adults as a novelty, because Walt Disney really drilled that into people's heads. And I don't even know how conscious it was on his part. It's just that he was such a corny guy. He was
Yeah.
he had, with, with some due respect to the Midwest, he just had very bland Midwestern tastes and ideas about art and culture. And he had a really lame sense of humor. And that was reflected in everything he did. And because he was the most financially successful, that's just what people came to associate and with animation and how it was defined for them, for not just, Disney's generation, but like, 2 or 3 generations after that.
Do you buy into a lot of I know that certain like for example, like on the left you have like their brand of conspiracy theory people would be like the parapolitics people, and some of that stuff is useful information, but I know that a lot of people, they talk about Walt Disney's various like glow in the dark connections through for example with Epcot and so forth. Like there's some connection there, and how animation was integral to the sort of like American spectacle of society. So do you think like it was a conscious programming, or was it just like the basic nuts and bolts consumer capitalist, mantra that if you sell things to children, you're going to make a lot of money? Like, where do you land on the Walt Disney question, in other words?
The DQ, not the Dairy
Yeah.
Queen. I don't know how much he glowed in the dark, but I will say that the reason that people assume that he was a Nazi is because he had kind of a Hitler-esque vision for, can I say Hitler? He had kind of a
Austrian painter, we'll say Austrian painter. Yeah.
he had kind of a dictatorial, totalitarian vision for entertainment, and it's reflected in the fact that when he, it's like talking about Alexander the Great. When he saw that he had nothing left to conquer, he wept, because animation was just the beginning for him. He, as soon as he could, he moved into live action features, and then he was an early adapter to television, and then he, basically created the modern theme park. And then after that, the last thing he did before he died, right, was he wanted to start creating his own cities, his own communities, the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. So people read all this sinister stuff into him because there is something inherently sinister about his megalo a combination of megalomania, but also like a folksy aw shucks
Yeah.
exterior to that megalomania. Um, oh, and then the other reason they assume that he's a Nazi is because he was friends with Werner von Braun and had him on television with him. But
Yeah, they have all like, oh, the Project Paperclip, and
honestly,
yeah.
honestly, Disney gets a bad rap with the jokes on Family Guy about him hating Jews and stuff. I don't think that's really true. But uh, you know, as a figure of the 20th century, he's he's a little bit frightening. It's a little bit frightening that so much power was accrued to one man, and still in his name, like, we have this Walt Disney Corporation
Yeah.
that carries on this vision of a kind of total control of all entertainment, like one company that just owns everything. And when the Disney company buys something, that it's going to get watered down. It's going to have the rough edges smoothed off. And people used to talk more about the Disney version of things. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
people would make fun of, like, oh yeah, the Disney version of this or that. It's going to be all cheerful and happy now. But I don't think people even do that anymore. It's just kind of accepted. People have just come to accept the dominance of Disney in their cultural lives.
Which is tragic in a way, because there is sort of like a weird kitchification of life through Disney, but then when you translate it to the current day, I know like a lot of like conservative grifters, like I'm talking, Daily Wire, Matt Walsh tier type of stuff. They'll talk about like Disney going woke or whatever, but um, but like the serious critique would be that there is sort of there no doubt is sort of like subtle social messaging that, but even behind that, if you were just to like bracket their obvious attempts to like wokeify what the like mass entertainment, there is something like inherently sinister outright just to have this huge conglomerate that has a very unique and sanitized style of entertainment delivery control such a huge share of literally the consciousness of people from a very young age. And
Oh yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah. It
And
really it really disturbs me too. Now that I'm a parent, how um, I mean, I guess this is something I always knew, but I didn't really see it in effect until I had children, which is that Disney really owns people's childhoods, and
yeah,
they own the sense of the imagination or the imaginarium. And when you, for example, look up a fairy tale that you might like to buy a book of for your child and read with your child, you enter Rapunzel or Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty into the Amazon search bar, and what version do you think is going to pop up first?
the Disney
And
one.
and I mean, it was, it was good business sense starting all the way back with Snow White for Walt to say, like, okay, what are some public domain fairy tales that we can use as the basis for films? But with the domination of Disney, you also have the domination of his and their vision of cultural history and stories that go back hundreds of years, or even if they don't, which are just good stories in their own right, that they kind of, by making their version the go-to version, they take it away from people. Like Winnie the Pooh would be a more modern example. Like
Yeah.
that's not hundreds of years old, but the original Winnie the Pooh books, Milne, I think, or Milne. I don't even know how to pronounce the author's name, but those are like very special things, and they're a reflection of the author. And the Disney version is fine, but that shouldn't be the only version that there is.
No, exactly. And it sort of like robs people of a inherent mythos. Like the Grimm fairy tales, for instance, was unique to a specific Germanic culture, but then now it's become this like mass globalized thing. And like, for example, the formula that they've perfected, that Disney's perfected above. I mean, the only comparison would be Disney owns Marvel, right? They own Marvel
Yeah,
or DC.
they own Marvel. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So yeah, there you go. Disney and Marvel, they sort of like perfected, I guess just Disney. Uh they've perfected like truly globalized culture to like lowest common denominator, where people that around the world that like live in the third world or in China or wherever, that they don't have English as a first language, like they can immediately like that, those are the things that go like super big. It goes everywhere. And I think that there's a weird planetization of culture that was only meant for specific European peoples. For example, in any Grimm fairy tale that they're remixing or reproducing. So it's very weird how they've had to like smooth down a lot of the edges to make it appeal to children with certain sensibilities, but also appeal to like the planet as a whole, which is, I don't know, there's something like very off-putting about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like if America is the center, the wellspring of globalism, then the Disney company didn't start out as the Department of Culture for the global American empire, but
Mhm.
that's kind of what it's become, if only de facto. Even if they don't have a official partnership, which I'm sure there's some official partnerships because the Department of Defense works with Hollywood, for example.
Oh
But
yeah.
yeah, I mean, Disney is essentially the global Department of Culture, and it sucks.
And so yeah, exactly. And so when we were talking about the sort of animation revolution for a particular generation, like to go back to John Kay, what does he think and what do you think? Like what were the events that transpired in the mid 90s that created such a huge outburst of creativity that was and stuff that, I mean, I know it's a meme nowadays because of Soylenial writers, but you had, for example, Courage the Cowardly Dog, things that kind of were adultish,
Hmm.
or but now it's become like you, as you pointed out numerous times, it's become like this weird trope of like Soylenial writers doing the whole like this isn't meant for children, like it's but but not being like conscious of that in a very postmodern way. What led to that explosion of creativity to where you could have things that were very raunchy, very surreal, like Red and Stimpy, things that had such a that were almost grotesque in a way, like, and that would never fly in the 70s, for instance. Like, what
Well,
led to
yeah.
that? Was it just culture in general became more edgy and more open? Like,
Uh,
yeah.
Perhaps I think there was I think in part culture allowed for it going out of the 80s and coming into the 90s, because I think the cultural scenes of the 90s were a lot more interested in being transgressive in the mainstream than 80s mainstream culture.
Yeah.
But the main thing that changed was the mode of production of animation for television. And essentially what happened was in the golden age of cartoons were produced as theatrical shorts, right?
Yes. Yes.
And the studios, Universal, Warner Brothers, they had these. Paramount eventually bought Fleischer Studios. They had cartoon departments, and in these cartoon departments, the artists and the animators basically had autonomy to do what they wanted. They had to answer to executives, but it wasn't anything at all like the mode of production for television, because when the theatrical short animation era ended and television began, there was a little bit of a transitional period, like I mentioned, where a lot of people who worked in the golden age were also working on these TV cartoons. And, like Hanna-Barbera, those guys did work at the MGM theatrical shorts department producing Tom and Jerry and stuff.
Oh
So
yeah.
when they were producing Yogi Bear and stuff like that, like they had respect for anime. They were animators themselves. They were cartoonists themselves, and they respected those guys, and they gave them creative freedom and autonomy and stuff. But what changed by the end of the 1960s, when TV production became more codified and entrenched, is that the people in charge of cartoon production for television were people who didn't come out of animation, didn't particularly care about animation, didn't particularly like animation, and they were organizing the production of animated TV shows as you would any live action TV show, which
I see.
doesn't fit, because people like to say TV is a writer's medium. Okay, well, animated cartoons are supposed to be a cartoonist's medium. So the discrepancy, or the contradiction that you had, was suddenly you have these animators being handed these scripts by these kind of fly by night hack TV writers who are just like, yeah, what do you need? A Yogi Bear cartoon? Okay, he steals picnic baskets, right? Okay, let me just get on the typewriter and bang that one out for you. And they hand off these scripts to the animators, and the animators are like, well, can we like change anything? Nope. That's not how TV works, and you better hurry up. Okay, well, can we get a little creative with the drawings? I don't know. Maybe if you want to like do some crazy drawing, we need to get it approved first. Like, animators and cartoonists just lost all creative control over
I
cartoons.
see.
And that's why when you look at cartoons from the 60s, it's like, yeah, they're low budget, yeah, they're limited animation, but if you watch an episode of Rocky and Bullwinkle, you can tell that the artists are like having fun drawing the characters and being creative and getting to do good work. Even when they're working off of scripts, which, even if they were written by non-cartoonists, could still be pretty good, because a lot of the early TV writers came out of the golden age of radio, so they could at least write funny dialogue and stuff. But anyways, yeah, there's like this abrupt change from the 60s to the 70s, where like suddenly cartoons just seem totally incompetent, like really really unwatchable. I don't think most people now even know like how unwatchable the average Saturday morning cartoon from the 1970s was. It's kind of defies belief.
Any particularly egregious examples you could think of?
I mean, even at Hanna-Barbera, which had started out all right, you could look up like, I don't know, Speed Buggy might have been one, Turbo Teen.
Oh
Um,
god. Like,
great,
yeah, like total schlock.
great.
Yeah.
Any number of their Scooby-Doo clones, like they were just ripping themselves off by that point. But yeah. Oh, the worst offender, though, the worst animation studio of the 1970s and probably into the 80s was Filmation, which basically copied Hanna-Barbera's business model, but did everything cheaper and lazier.
Oh
and
yeah, it was like the knockoff equivalent. Yeah.
yeah, and
Oh,
like
they did Fat Albert.
they did Fat Albert
In the
and Fat.
Cosby Kids. Oh my god, that was some of the stuff I gotta admit though, like some of the dialogue in Fat Albert, like from like a modern, like cynical, like especially like from modern cynical, like denizen lens was like kind of funny though. Like it was like unintentionally funny and like
I mean, I
yeah.
guess, Gen Xers, speaking of, have a kind of kitschy, nostalgic fondness for these absolute dog shit cartoons from the 70s, like Fat Albert. But like, really, try sitting down and watching a whole episode of Fat Albert. Try watching 2 episodes without your brains completely leaking out
Oh,
of their ears. Oh,
me
and
and
there
two
was
me and two friends did that once on Discord. It was hilarious. It was the Fat Albert one where he's like, uh, you have to realize like that new kid is retarded. Like,
I know. I like yeah, that
that
stuff
was
that stuff is
hilarious. Yeah.
that stuff is very funny, but
But it was terrible, like from the animation perspective. Like it was just like,
there
oh,
there's a document which I think John Kay might have like held on to and posted on his blog. I think that's where I saved it from. But it's like a model sheet of one of the Fat Albert characters, showing him from like the front view, the 3/4 view, the side view. And there are these typewritten notes from corporate saying, copy these poses as often as possible. Do not do new drawings. Photocopy these drawings as often as you can for the layouts. It's just like really literally instructing them to be as uncreative as possible with the animation, because that's how they're going to save money. So that's kind of who the industry was being run by in the 70s. Sorry, I'm not giving you a short answer to this.
no, it's good. It's cool.
Okay,
Yeah.
but in the 80s, studios started outsourcing to Japanese studios, and
And eventually Korean, like short
right.
stuff.
Well, that came later. The Korean animation industry was basically started by Hollywood for the purpose of outsourcing, because they couldn't just outsource everything to Taiwan and Japan anymore.
Yeah.
But in the 1980s, cartoons start to look a little different because they're outsourcing to Japan, and you get these like weird pseudo anime-ish looking styles on cartoons like G.I. Joe and the Real Ghostbusters, where
Oh yeah.
yeah, it's like it's not quite anime, but you can sort of tell watching it like maybe Japanese people animated it.
They like transmogrify G.I. Joe into anime.
Children at the time wouldn't have known this, of course, but
Of course, yeah.
in hindsight, knowing about anime now, we can see how that worked. Okay, but what really changed for the American industry was in 1987, Ralph Bakshi got a deal to make a children's cartoon, and that
That's
was
insane, by the way. Yeah.
right.
In hindsight, yeah.
Unthinkably, but only something like this could have helped save the industry, right? Because what he winds up doing is a reboot of Mighty Mouse, and he goes around LA and he hires, who he knows are the best young talent at that time, including young John Cristofalusi, young Bruce Timm, young Kent Butterworth, Jim Reardon, who would later go on to do The Simpsons. Bunch of guys, really strong talent. And he says, okay, you guys, I'm in charge, and I say you guys are going to get to make cartoons kind of like they did in the old days. Like, I'm not going to make you work from these crappy hack scripts from people who can't even draw. You guys come up with the stories. You guys storyboard them out. We're going to make the drawings funny. We're going to make the animation wacky. And, it was like a mid sort of budgeted show. It was like maybe $500,000 per episode at the time. So like not super cheap, maybe like 700,000, not super cheap, but a little bit more money than some other shows, so they could make it look a little better. And it wasn't like a ratings smash, but it had this big impact on the industry where other basically animators looked at it and said, wow, can we do something like that? And then a couple of years later, you have Tiny Toons. You start to have these shows where it's like, okay, we can give some more creative license to the animators again. Oh, and then a couple of years later, Nickelodeon launches their Nicktoons series of Rugrats, Doug, and of course Ren and Stimpy all premiere, and then
core Soylenial stuff.
Yeah. And then Ren and Stimpy really blows people's minds, and then suddenly the whole industry is like, oh yeah, maybe we can have some more cartoons like that from now on. There was so much stuff going on in the late 80s, early 90s. Batman the Animated Series started, The Simpsons started. So yeah, just a really intense period of change in the late 80s onto early 90s that gave the 90s a lot of momentum for cartoons to be good and cool and interesting again. And what changed after that is a little more vague, perhaps, because it wasn't any one thing. It was more like, I guess, entropy. It's like there wasn't enough momentum left to kind of keep the innovation continuing as it should have, because I think, really, I know Adventure Time has its fans and stuff, but I think when Adventure Time came out, and as the 2000s became the 2010s, these really simplified art styles started to get really popular. And part of that, I believe, is intertwined with Tumblr culture.
Yes.
Because Tumblr is and was sort of a great thing as far as like being a platform for young cartoonists to share their work, but it also encouraged a sort of sameness and a sort of good enough art style, where if you could draw in this, I've taken to calling it bean mouth for a long time now, but it's sort of what we think of as the modern style of very rounded edges, bean-shaped bodies, rounded teeth. It looks a little bit like old 1930s rubber hose, but it's kind of like squishier, and people tend to look like blobs, and the color design tends to be very pastel.
The Cal Art style, in other words.
Well, I used to call it Cal Art style too. I don't anymore, because I don't think that really, that kind of like almost lets the style off easy.
Like Rebecca Sugar went to the New York, what's it called? New York School of Animation.
It's a little bit unfair to Cal Arts, because actually a lot of talented people went to Cal Arts. Gennady Tartakovsky went to Cal Arts. Craig McCracken went to Cal Arts. Like, I don't think you can entirely hang it on Cal Arts, because really Cal Arts just teaches whatever they think is the industry standard at the time. So when the industry standard started looking more like Steven Universe, that's what they started teaching. But, as far as Tumblr goes, I think this part of the reason this art style caught on is that it was easier for aspiring artists to draw and post on Tumblr and say, hey, look, I'm pretty close to a professional level now if I can draw this style really well. But economically, in terms of like production, the other reason that this style was promoted and caught on is because it is easier for outsourced Korean animators to draw in bulk, because it's so much simpler.
Yeah, and also I think there's something else going on, because I mentioned this style in passing in my forthcoming book entitled Neoliberal Kitsch, Art and Aesthetics in the 21st Century. Sorry, online art and aesthetics in the 21st century. I mentioned how, for example, if you, what would you call it, or it used to be known as art Twitter, quote unquote, or the people that work in the industry, or these like Zoomers with Wacom tablets, they always have this very kitschy, repetitive style that is unique to their like post-Tumblr identity complexes, if you will. They always have pastel colors. They always look very shiny. They're very rounded. They're very, how shall I say it, BIPOC-ish, if you know what I mean. Like they have a particular style that developed, I guess you could say, like Humans of Flat Design. It was like an appropriation of mid-century modernism, but now you have this like digital like overlay where it's like this one-to-one similitude of like their own self-insert, and like that's the reality. And a lot of it is like just terrible recolors of Vivziepop or Rebecca Sugar or what have you. But it's like, how did this style like it seems to be everywhere. And if you mention it, these people will attack you, as you know. It's like,
Yeah.
but do you think it's because it intersected with the 2010s Tumblr culture, or do you think that there's something more going on?
Well,
Because
I
it
don't.
seems,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I don't want to pontificate too much about like the ideological component of it. I mean,
Right.
I think there is one, and I think it does have to do with what you're getting at, which is
There's an
that
aesthetic truth to it, in other words. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, aesthetics do reflect people's beliefs, and if you look at popular cartooning styles from the 2000s, for instance, you see a lot of literal edges for art styles that people wanted to associate with edginess. But in the 2010s, yes, it becomes more rounded, it becomes more blob-like, and it becomes more androgynous too. It kind of has to
Yes,
do.
androgyny is a big one. Yeah.
It kind of has to do with like eliminating contrasts, which is terrible for cartooning because cartooning is at its best all about heightening and exaggeration. And the modern style, what I hate about it the most is that it feels so watered down and it feels so in undefined, like a unformed piece of clay or something.
Yeah.
And it's by design. Everyone, all cartoon characters drawn in the post Adventure Time, post Steven Universe style, all just kind of look like little fat children or something. Like everyone's fat,
Yeah.
right? Like that's kind of that's one of the key defining features.
Everyone's fat.
Everyone's
Everyone's
fat.
brown.
Yeah.
Everyone's other things I probably can't say. But yeah, it's like it's got the But Adventure Time is interesting because I quite enjoyed the first few seasons of Adventure Time. I think that it had a really great mythological backstory, but then by the time you went on, it's like, okay, I think what happened was Pendleton Ward left, and then it just became like Tumblr Fest, and it's like, you know what I mean? Like it wasn't even just because of the politics; it was just because the story didn't go. Like I felt like they robbed people of that very interesting post-apocalyptic backstory that like to focus solely on like, okay, let's ship these characters, let's appeal to the Tumblr crowd, let's do all the little like kitschy things, and it's I don't know,
Well,
like
yeah.
What do you think? Yeah,
I mean, I don't have strong opinions about Adventure Time, except that I do see it artistically as a demarcation point in terms of when the modern style began, because I
yeah,
think it premiered in 2008, 2009, something like that. And I was too old for it when it started, but I remember being taken aback by the look of it and thinking, "Oh, that's really neat that they have this very simple childlike style and the characters have these noodly arms that wiggle and wave everywhere, and it feels evocative of old Betty Boop cartoons or old Fleischer cartoons,
mm,
Popeyes, where you've got olive oil and her noodly arms and legs flailing every which way. Like I saw a lot of that in it, and I liked that, but ultimately, I think it turned out to be a bad influence because it's almost like Peanuts. When Peanuts became a cultural phenomenon,
yeah,
people looked at that art style and they said, "Oh, it's so simple. Like we can do that. Like that's easy to do." And it's like, well, actually, Charles Schultz worked very hard to make that simple. It's deceptively simple, like so many great things. Like there's actually a lot of thoughtfulness put into it, and the imitators don't have the same level of skill or thoughtfulness in it.
yeah, exactly. And I think that it seems like that like it's there's just been like a plague of this, and in probably like crafting things for more of a more digital media is probably another like the updated Simpsons is totally different. I mean, I could this podcast could be 5 hours long if we went to talk about the Simpsons, but like as you know, as a I an enjoyer of the early seasons, and to see like the utter abomination is now, but even like SpongeBob or a lot of the cartoons that we grew up with, it's like it seems that there's been like a persistent spirit that's been robbed from them. And I wonder if that's because they're overtly digitalized, or is it that animators just don't care, don't try anymore, or they don't have the same freedom. I mean, I
the
guess there's indie animators that do, but
the digitization is absolutely a part of it because Flash animation it can be a great tool when it's used by animators who have the traditional skills and the foundation of skills, and they're
Mhm.
using flash animation and rigging, which is kind of like using parts of a drawing as assets that you can put on axes and move around
Oh, is
without
that
having.
like ray tracing or that's different?
No, I think that's different, but it's sort of like rigging animation in the post digital landscape means using parts of a drawing, being able to move parts of a drawing without having to redraw them over and over, essentially.
Right, right.
So if you know what you're doing, that can be a great assist. But if you are just starting, and I think like a lot of people have learned to animate now just with that tool to use more as a crutch, then you get animation that is a lot stiffer because you feel like you're just watching the same motions being recycled over and over. And as to the modern art style, I think part of the reason it caught on again is because it's easier to animate.
Mhm. Because, like, I remember, like, again, as a Canadian, like, Reboot was really big here, and it was, like, fresh, and it was new, and
Oh yeah, I
they
watched
yeah.
Reboot. Yeah,
Oh, yeah, okay, so, like, there was, like, it was an unexplored territory, it was, like, a verve to it, but
yeah.
now yeah,
But
it's like
I have so much more affection for Reboot than any Pixar thing because Pixar basically took this digital animation technology and used it to make um, 3D digital versions of what would otherwise be Disney cartoons.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
Reboot is from that early computer animation era of like Beyond the Mind's Eye, where the computer animators were just like, how surreal can we make this? How strange and uncanny
I loved,
can
like,
we make this look?
the early digital animation, like, even, like,
Hmm.
just as like, there's this great, Twitter account, it's called, I think it's called, like, retro like, something, like
Early 3D renders, one of
early
those
3D
types of
renders,
accounts.
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
and the landscapes in particular, like, there's a weird sort of, like, quietness to them. There's, something very surreal, but also, like, in a weird way, like, post-human in a sense, the way that
Yeah,
they're
kinda like the Myst CD-ROM game.
yes, yes, there's, like, a stillness to them that I
Mhm.
quite enjoy, and I think, like, that vibe of, like, because I always loved that type of, like, early 2000s Y2K, Bryce 3D type
Yeah,
of
but
yeah,
that's it but what we're talking about is even before that. It's like
yes,
the
yeah.
early '90s, vibe and aesthetic. Did you ever play the Residence Freak Show CD-ROM? Do you know what that
No, I've
is?
never played that, I've never played that.
Are you familiar with the Residents, the band?
I think I am, it's
They're
rings a bell. Yeah.
they're kind of like Devo insofar as that they were both a band, but also an art project and
Mhm,
an
mhm.
art collective. And one of the multimedia experiments or creations that they made was a CD-ROM called Freak Show, where it was in first person and you would go around a freak show and look at the different freak acts, and there would be accompanying songs, of course. And these freak characters are what we're talking about, like these very bizarre looking CG animated characters that look nothing at all like what we associate with CG animation today, as far as like not just Pixar, but Shrek movies or Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs or whatever. Just really funky looking stuff. I would strongly recommend checking out Residence Freak Show on YouTube, looking at a playthrough just to get an idea of what I'm talking about.
Oh, that's very interesting. That's almost like music acts that would do a lot of, like, video art stuff,
Hmm.
like Psychic TV, stuff like that, uh, but that's it yeah, and there was something even to, like, the very first, like, 80s animation. I was watching one of these YouTubers going through the history. For example, you have, like, the animations that you'd find at, like, bowling alleys and stuff like that.
Mm,
That's, like,
yeah.
very, crazy, yeah,
Yeah.
and out there. But but it just seems like I guess a core issue that you're getting at that you've posted about on Twitter and elsewhere is that it's sort of like a repeated theme that you have in multiple mediums, whether it be cinema or even like a more, I guess, a more ridiculous example would be like professional wrestling, where it's like you have a poetry of emotion. And this is, for example, what Andre Bresson talks about in his essays on cinema, where the moving image is fundamentally different than theater, because theater,
Mm.
you have to have dialogue, you have to have the theatrics, uh, but whereas cinema can depict things that are imperceptible to to language alone. But then when it becomes overtly wordy, it's basically just like a theater production on film. Professional
Yes.
wrestling is similar in that, like, you had people that like came from like the original Carney Spirit, the Booker. Then like by the time you get to the Attitude Era, you, and as much as I enjoy him, you have people like Vince Russo. It's like basically a television drama, and now of course WWE's like Disneyland, right? In other words, it's not about it's not about what's happening in the ring, the story you're telling through this physical interaction. Rather, it's about like, okay, Rey Mysterio's in a war with his son Dominic, and it's like, who cares, right? Because it's not really
Yeah.
about the actual performance. And so what you're saying is an animation similar in that this, like, you would say, this like weird like logocentrism, where like the written word is everything.
Yes,
Where
yes,
yeah,
writers took over the medium, and that's actually the simplest way I can put it, is that animation is just like cinema. It should be a visual storytelling medium. That doesn't mean it has to be pure visuals, but it is supposed to be a visual medium first. And television is a word-oriented, dialogue-oriented medium. Certainly, at least it was, for the longest time before prestige TV and very expensive shows like Game of Thrones that look like movies. But honestly, look at Game of Thrones again, or even Breaking Bad, or any of these shows that people praise for their cinematic qualities. It's still mostly at its core people having these dialogue scenes with each
well, The
other.
Sopranos were the
Mm.
trailblazers for this. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and when you look at those terrible cartoons from the 70s, I mean, hell, all the way to today, look at terrible cartoons now. It, the worst of them are basically just people sitting around and talking, or standing around and talking, and that's the first most immediate giveaway that you're watching a cartoon that where writers were in charge and not artists or cartoonists, to be more precise. And I say cartoonists and artists a little bit interchangeably, but kind of the whole point of being a cartoonist is that you're not just good at drawing, you can also use your drawings to communicate. And Charles Schultz, all Bill Watterson, all of these guys were cartoonists who could draw really well, and they could also communicate their ideas through the medium of comics. And animation ought to be run by the same types of people who just happen to be, working in moving in drawings, moving pictures, animation, rather than the still image communication of comics. But yeah, the point is, yeah, the writers took over the industry from cartoonists with TV, and it's never completely gotten back in cartoonists' hands.
Yeah, exactly. And it's tragic in a way, because I remember you were using the example of John Kay with Ren and Stimpy, and there was, I remember even like the sound as well. Like I remember the one of my favorite scenes was who is who is Stimpy's friend, where they like wrecked everything,
Sven
like
Hoek.
Sven
Sven
Ho.
Hoek. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and like, and then you had that like moment where uh like Ren's going crazy, and you hear like those like distant distortion sounds, and the way that like he's conveying it through motion, like, and I'm gonna hit you and you're gonna fall, right? And there was a poetics to that. But then
Hmm.
as time goes on, I guess just because like it takes so long to animate, uh you almost had to like genericize it
Well,
by
that's
necessity. Yeah.
That's it. That scene is an amazing piece of animation, but it's also an amazing piece of directing. And TV was never really, I mean, people say it's a writer's medium, and they're correct. It's not often that you see uh, direction in television. Mostly directors on TV shows are just kind of staging things to make sure that it reads clearly. And that was the incredible thing about Ren and Stimpy, was that you felt like you were watching something that had a directorial vision and a sense of authorship, like by a filmmaker. And part of that is just the fact that there was even pacing, right? Because that episode, Sven Hoek, it's like Sven shows up at Ren and Stimpy's house. Sven is being idiotic with Stimpy, and it's happy and it's light and it's carefree, and they're making a big mess. And then Ren comes home and he's horrified by what they've done to the house, and then that horror turns into rage, and then he gets very calm, and it's a little bit frightening because he's just got this anger simmering under the surface. And that's not just about like the drawings and the dialogue and the animation. It's also about the fact that the mood has shifted. Like if you were watching a film and something changes and the atmosphere becomes something different, there's an up and down, there's peaks and valleys. So that was, aside from everything else, that was one of the most revolutionary things about Ren and Stimpy, was bringing back direction to cartoons, which you hadn't seen since, honestly, even in the golden age. Like there weren't that many cartoons where the mood could change like that, or there would be ups and downs. Bob Clampett gets rightly celebrated because I think he was one of the few directors who could take you on a journey in just a 7-minute cartoon. Have you ever seen The Great Piggy Bank Robbery?
I think I have, a long, long time ago. Yeah.
Duck Tracy. Daffy has a dream that he's Dick Tracy, basically.
Oh, yeah.
And he goes to the villain's hideout. And recently it became a meme because there's that scene where he's looking at all the different villains and they're surrounding him. But anyways, that's a great example. That's one of the best cartoons ever made. But it's so remarkable because it's only 7 minutes long and so much happens. And there is like there's a beginning, middle, and end that each feel separate and different, and there are these set pieces and stuff. And so yeah, Clampett was one of the great directors of that era because he was a real director. He wasn't just making it look funny and making the timing funny and making it move funny. He did all of that, but he was also like an auteur in a filmmaking sense for animation.
Oh yeah, but that's what I mean. Like when you look at cartoons nowadays, and like in such stark contrast. Like I remember I was at a family gathering, and almost my cousins are like older Gen Xers, right? So they have kids of their own who are, I guess, now Gen Alpha, and watching what's that show, Teen Titans Go?
Yeah.
And I remember I'm like, my God, like, isn't it burning your eyeballs out? Like, it's no, I couldn't keep up. I was having an aneurysm almost. I'm like, everything's like in your face. Like you were saying, there's no real depth. It all looks very, like all of the tones are of a similar, like on a similar layout. There really isn't a lot of like depth of field in terms of color choices. It's very like neonish and it's in your face. And there really is it like I don't know. I guess is it a generational
there's a certain
thing?
No,
Yeah,
I think it's again. I think it's a television thing because TV by its nature is sort of monotonous. Like if you turn on a sitcom, the jokes are going to be delivered by the actors at a certain pace that's not really going to vary as it would like in a comedy film, or a particularly good comedy film where you might have slow scenes and fast scenes and things feel like they're building up towards something. TV is just monotonous by nature, and it's sort of monotonous even when it's good because I don't know, you look at the terrible cartoons of the 70s and 80s, everything is kind of proceeding at about the same pace, whether it's supposed to be an action scene or a comedy scene or something else. And even I don't think Teen Titans Go. I mean, I wouldn't watch it, and I wouldn't want my kid to watch it. But
yeah,
like I can tell at least they're trying to keep things high energy and sort of lively. But even within that, it's like everything is kind of high energy at about the same pace. It's not, you don't get any building up towards something. And even some of the better cartoons like SpongeBob or something, they do tend to be a little monotonous.
Yeah.
Although SpongeBob did have like Ren and Stimpy people who worked on it at the beginning and who are working on it now, and they do have an appreciation for trying to tell stories that escalate or de-escalate, or trying to create a mood and an atmosphere, and not have it just be the same thing over and over.
Well, there was recently a clip that you replied to. I have to read this tweet because I saw this other one who I was actually stunned because it was like one of these people that was like, like had those like kitschy PFPs with like the Palestinian watermelon and the Kamala coconut in the bio, but they were even saying like this is total slop. What's this show from this clip where it's like some of the best 54 seconds of animation, and then you said,
Oh,
what's
yeah.
that show?
Amphibia.
Amphibia, yeah.
Yeah.
You said these sort of clips always look like PBS kids trying to do Dragon Ball Z. We want our young adult cartoons to have awesome fight scenes like an anime, but we don't want to have it to be we don't have to be better artists to storyboard them. And it's like very just like high octane super fight, but it's got like the whole girl boss thing. There's like some influences from Studio Ghibli, not even like anime proper. It's like very much that post-tumblr style that we were
Yeah, that's
yeah.
that's kind of a perfect modern example of the post Tumblr style, because I'm looking at a promotional image for the show right now, and yeah, you can see a direct lineage from Steven Universe and Adventure Time. You've got this character whose head is just sort of a round circle. Her eyes are round ovals. You got those little pinpoint pupils that are a hallmark of all these shows, which really started with The Simpsons. But
Yeah.
she's got the noodly limbs, and yeah, it's sort of clearly drawn so that the Korean animation studios that the animation is actually outsourced to will be able to have a faster turnaround, but they can never admit that. They have to pretend that like, oh yeah, this is the style that's popular, and it's popular because everyone likes it, and everyone likes it because it's popular. And
yeah, the villain looks like that character from Regular Show.
and like,
Like,
and
yeah.
never mind that there's like dozens of other shows that look just like this. Ours has a main character who's Thai, so that's what sets us apart.
Yeah.
We've got that going for us, which is nice.
Oh man, no, but it truly is a tragedy because it, like we were saying about Disney, it really is sort of like the psychic filter for children around the globe nowadays. And I shudder to think like the influences that Gen Alpha is growing up with when
Well,
it
I
comes to
mean,
animation. Yeah.
yeah, in a way, it's a bit like I think animation is going slightly the way of uh well, okay, I was going to say it's going slightly the way of like TV and movies, where those just don't have as much importance in mainstream pop culture as they used to. And that's true, because like ratings aren't just down from 10 years ago on children's networks like Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network and Disney. Ratings are down all across the board. Like, people just aren't watching TV like they used
Yeah.
to. They're not going to movies like they used to. But as far as animation is concerned, basically Japan has won the war here, people. It's that the kids, to the degree that to the degree that kids are interested in comics and animation, they're reading manga and they're watching anime. And I don't know what else to tell you about that. I don't blame them.
Yeah, of course. I quite enjoy some anime here and there. But it seems like what's filling in the void is kind of in some ways worse because I mean, I don't know if it could be worse, but there's a lot of like slop content that really young kids are looking at. Like my good friend Frenel Blowdart, he alerted people to what his nephews and nieces are watching is like this nugget thing where it's like they're doing like the Cotton Eye Joe song, but they're nuggets, sort of like Skibbity Toilet, but it's like that. And there's like this other thing that's very popular in TikTok with like these road lights. It's like very like it's almost got like the Spider-Man Elsa,
Yeah, that
vibes. Yeah.
yeah, I guess Spider-Man Elsa is yesterday's news, and now we've got a chicken nugget singing Cotton Eye Joe. I hadn't heard of this until just now, and this looks absolutely awful. And
Yeah, it's got like Nick Avocado when he was still fat, and it's well, even like, do you have a hot take on the Skibbity toilet thing, or you just prefer to ignore that? I don't know.
I don't know, haven't we already passed peak Skibbity toilet?
Yeah, I
Or
guess. Yeah.
is Skibbity Toilet the movie in the works? Is that going to break all box office records?
I think they are making a movie. I know that they're making a Backrooms movie with Kane Pixels, which is
Oh,
interesting.
is it? Well, it was like Blumhouse making that.
Um,
I wouldn't. I wouldn't put it
not
past them.
not Blumhouse. A24. A24.
Oh no, really?
Yeah.
I love how A24 started out as this like prestigious art house art film studio, and now they're just like a horror studio. Now they just put out these artsy horror movies. They're the upmarket version of Blumhouse.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they did the Civil War one recently, and I think
Yeah.
they produced that other Alex Garland one, Men, which was quite good. But I didn't watch Civil War. I was going to, but then yeah. But
Sometimes I
yeah.
don't mind that because I think they're going to be putting out the next version of Nosferatu by that guy who made the Northman and The Witch.
Eggers, Robert Eggers.
Yeah, which I like his stuff, so I don't mind that they're putting out an artsy horror film every now and then if it's something I actually want to see. But hey, maybe they should put out an animated film. I don't know.
Yeah. No, but that's what I mean. Like there is like that weird attitude in North America because like animation being interpolated as like children. Because for example, recently I reviewed someone wanted me to review the French animation film Fantastic Planet, which I believe was animated by a Soviet animator, and very surreal, very trippy, of course, for the 70s. And I feel like there could be a potentiality for that again. I mean, the Backrooms does have this internet lore that intersects with a lot of, like we all know about like the liminal spaces stuff, and it's very like nostalgic in some ways. It's very for the times because I mean I could write a whole essay on this about like the Backrooms intersects with their fascination with space because now we live in the age of spaces and like the non-space, right? And it seems like conveying that, like, and a lot of these people that do Backrooms compilations, they're quite like they go to great lengths to make it very gritty and like analog and nostalgic. But
Yeah.
but I wonder like if
I don't
there,
know.
yeah, go ahead.
I don't know that I've really seen too much analog horror or liminal horror that seems like it was made by people my age or older who were actually around when things were more analog. It always seems like someone younger than me trying to imagine what that was like and how creepy it must have been. And it's like, well, it did have a creepiness to it, but I don't know if like I saw Skinamarink, and I thought it was I thought it was pretty bad, and I could appreciate what they were going for, but I don't know if they quite got there.
It was a bit too drawn out. I feel like it could have been shorter. Like it could have just been a short and it would have been more effective.
Yeah.
Yeah. But when it comes to there still is like a lot of design and animation that I like is its purpose is purely as like a mechanism of generating discourse. Like a lot of that like modern style of illustration. For example, the recent what was it? The New Yorker cover. I'm sure you saw it. Yeah,
you mentioned
the nannies.
Yeah. You mentioned Humans of Flat, and what gets called Humans of Flat is kind of like it's definitely a part of the same family tree as the modern cartooning style, which I guess Beanmouth is probably as good a term as any. I called it Beanmouth all the time, but I don't talk about it so much anymore now because it's like, what else is there left to say? But yeah, Beanmouth, Humans of Flat, and that New Yorker cover isn't as stylized as Humans of Flat, but it certainly feels part of a kind of nondescript style where it's sort of like intended not to evoke any strong reactions on a visual level, because you look at that New Yorker cover and you just sort of read it on a surface level, and it's purely illustrative. It's
Yeah.
not there's no exaggeration, there's no heightening of anything. It's a very bland look. It's kind of like a style that's the absence of style.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really not about a unique aesthetic. It's not about like an artistic quality, for instance. It's purely designed as a discursive mechanism for whatever like agenda they wanted to push. And I was actually like I was driving for my girlfriend, and I was listening to Red Scare breakdown. I don't know if I should admit this. I listened to Red Scare, but I was actually listening to Anna and Dasha break it down, and it's basically it really works on a lot of like those upper middle class white liberals that quite enjoy reading the New Yorker, because it's like this form of like faux sophistication, and it's like they
Hmm.
love being guilt tripped over it. But the point being is that it's not about the art itself. It's really about the messaging. And the art is
Yeah.
conveying in the most simplest terms possible. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to New Yorker's credit, they have had artists like Daniel Clowes and Ivan Bernetti, like really
Mhm.
good cartoonists, do covers before. And the thing about an artist like Clowes in particular, who I think is one of the all-time great comics authors, he can render someone's face or expression or a moment in such a way that he gets so much across just in the subtleties of their body language and the composition of the image. And that's, that's really the opposite of the purely functionary style of the cover, the nanny cover.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, all these people, I don't know, those people are going to be replaced by AI art probably, and there's like this,
Good. Yeah, they
yeah,
ought to be, because what's the difference? Because they're like, we
yeah.
have we have a lot of AI artists already. They're actually human beings. And
They might as well be AI. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That's what I like. Like all these people on like art Twitter, if you want to call it that, like they really they've had this like crusade. I know like talking about AI art is sort of like passe, but they have this like crusade for intellectual property rights and for copyright. And I could remember when like it was the like left anarchist position to be against IP, to be against
Hmm.
copyright as an inherently fascistic and power imbalanced system that's wielded by corporations. But now they love it. Like there was this photographer, this like woke Korean photographer who had this painter did this painting of one of her photographs of a woman, but it was like he only changed the garb that she was wearing, and she ended up suing him.
Hmm.
And they all loved this. They cheer. It was a super mega viral tweet, and all these like things about like, and there's been like a number of like huge super viral discourses around AI animation and art. Like we all know the infamous completion of the Keith Haring piece. Like,
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But like,
Keith Haring, one of those ancient astronauts of the Humans of Flat style.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And but it's very funny how there has been like this sea change. Is it just purely like gut level? I'm reactionary about the things I love, or are you seeing that they're forming these thoughts or discourses around animation and copyright, and that AI is going to threaten them on such like a fundamental level? Is it purely just mercenary, or do they
Oh
actually like?
yeah. Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely. They all think they're temporarily embarrassed Matt Groenings or Vivziepops. Like they think as soon as they come up with that one cartoon character, they're going to be rich. Uh,
Um,
so yeah,
yeah,
they're
because
very
Vizpop actually did do it though. She did come up with that one character,
right. Well,
that
they're yeah.
style.
That's why they hate her. That's why they hate her. That's why they're saying like, oh, all of her characters look the same, like, and yours don't. Like, you guys are all drawing like each other. There's like there's
Yeah.
a there's 1,000 cartoonists drawing in the style that you're drawing in. Like, sorry that Vivziepop is doing something that's inspired by Jonan Vasquez instead of Pendleton Ward or Rebecca Sugar.
That's crazy because a lot of these people, they look like Vivziepop. Like they have the same style. It's like there's a million like copies of her, but they hate her now. I didn't know this. This is
I think, yeah, no, Vivziepop gets a lot of hate, and Has Been Hotel gets a lot of hate, specifically from Tumblr artists who I really think it's just jealousy.
they're still in
And
the ghetto. Yeah.
yeah, I really think it's just jealousy, because what she's doing is not revolutionary at all, but it does feel like a little bit of a throwback, at least, to something like Invader Zim. And
Mhm.
I don't know if they feel like that's retrograde. They feel like, well, we've moved beyond that now. We've smoothed out all the angular, sharp edges of the Jonan Vasquez influence, and we're not doing that anymore. And how dare she have a success with that? But yeah, that original Has Been Hotel pilot actually does have some nice animation, and I think that's the reason why it sold, is because it did have some nice animation. It wasn't just, people tend to think of animation in terms of designs, like you got to have the right art style, you got to find a certain character design, and obviously that stuff is important. But the reason people don't talk about animation anymore as a way for artists to express themselves is because it all got outsourced so long ago, and it's not even done here. There was a clip from the show Big City Greens, which drove me up the freaking wall. It was an episode where, are you familiar with this show?
Big
It's
City Greens. Let me
yeah.
look this up.
If you look it up, it's definitely drawn in the modern bean mouth style we're talking about.
Oh, this one. They
Yes.
got like that guy. Okay, they got like, I guess he's a Trump character, but they got this guy that looks like what was his name from Billy and Mandy, the black best friend, Alvin, or what was his name? Hey guys, you know that guy?
Yeah,
He
I
looks
do.
like him. Like he looks like the best friend from Billy and Mandy.
Huh.
Like, yeah, go ahead, Big City Greens.
Billy and Mandy is one of those cartoons I didn't think was that good at the time, but I look back on it now. It's like, oh, we didn't know
It's
how good we
amazing.
had it.
Yeah, yeah.
Things
Well,
have
this
gotten,
is
but
this like Gravity Falls, right? Like it's the same.
oh, I mean,
Yeah,
I would put Gravity Falls in the same bean mouth category
yeah.
as these other shows, but there was this scene from an episode of Big City Greens where the characters learn how a cartoon is made. Haha, very self-referential, very, fourth wall
Mhm.
breaking jokes. But there's a joke where it's like, okay, well, all the storyboards and drawings for the cartoon are done. Now we're just going to send it to Korea. And the joke is that it's like launched on a catapult to Korea, and they say some kind of incantation like, make the drawings move, make the drawings move. And I watch this and I'm like, oh yeah, that's really funny, guys. It's really funny how the animation, which is like one of the most authentically, originally American art forms of the 20th century, like jazz or baseball, or the mystery story, which precedes the 20th century. But
Mm.
it's like, yeah, we sold our birthright. Haha. We sold the industry. Hollywood sold its birthright when it comes to animation for a mess of pottage, and now kids want to watch anime instead. And it's really funny how that happened. It
Oh,
was like,
yeah.
you're talking about AI, the controversy over AI. It's like there's this union group called like Tag. I don't remember what it stands for, but there were these videos that were narrated by Adam Conover from Adam Ruins Everything,
Oh
circulating on animation
God.
Twitter, where he's talking about how, like, oh, the animation industry is run by these corporate shills who are so greedy. And it's like, yeah, that's true. And he's saying, like, and they're trying to replace artists with AI, and we've got to protect animation jobs. It's like, protect animation jobs. Like, where have you been? Like, since the 1980s, any studio that wants its animation to look halfway decent has been outsourcing to Asia. Like, why don't you focus on bringing that industry back over here? Like, I think that might create a few more animation jobs.
This this is like literally like woke neoliberalism. Like that's like I hate the term woke, by the way. I'm saying it way too much, but like colloquially, like it's literally like a more like it's like fair use coffee. on Starbucks. It's very much like
Mm.
a neoliberal solution to what is ostensibly a activist problem that just creates more problems. It's like it's same with like the New Yorker illustration where I think it was my good friend Kashwagi that had that tweet that went viral about um like modern feminism isn't really addressing the problem of women being exploited for their labor. Rather, it's just outsourcing the problem to the third world, and we have to like feel guilty about that. So it's like okay, you can't. The big evil AI art is going to replace animators, but the jobs are already being outsourced. So it's like, well, we need to like protect the industry. It's not about pretending like protecting the actual creators. It's really just protecting the industry as it currently is.
Well,
Which
right.
is really weird.
They care about protecting industry jobs now that it looks like above the line industry jobs might be at risk. There might be AI programs that could generate some character designs that some executive would sign off on, as opposed to someone having a cushy character animate or character designer job.
Yeah. No, exactly. And that's what I mean. It really is just like displacing the problem.
Yeah.
Whereas like I guess AI could potentially do a lot of those in between jobs that are very tedious when it comes to animation. But
I'm very optimistic about AI replacing everybody. I'm a big not when it comes to stuff that matters, but when it comes to like designing kids cartoons, yeah,
Yeah.
sure. They look, they're already designed by human AI already because they're, they don't look very original to me. Do you see a lot of originality in animation
Oh
today?
God, no.
Oh, Disney had to step in when every browser started getting its own AI image generator. Disney had to step in and tell some of these AI generators, like, hey, stop making it so easy for these posters to make fake Disney movies about 20th century German man.
Thank you for listening to the Content Minded podcast. If you wish to support me and listen to every episode in full, then please go to patreon.com/giantartproductions and substack.com/Gio's Content Corner. There you will find the full archive of every Content Minded episode, as well as every Giant Art Review episode, and exclusive to all patrons, the weekly Cole Report, where I break down interesting stories and discourse from throughout the week. Subscribe today to keep the content renaissance alive.